The gunshot echoed across the dusty plain, startling a flock of crows into flight as Xavier Blackwood reined in his stallion at the edge of the ridge. Below him, a horse-drawn wagon kicked up clouds of amber dust on the trail, and even from this distance, he could see something wasn't right with the two figures arguing beside it. The year was 1876, and the Montana Territory spread before him like a wild, untamed beast. Xavier had spent the better part of a decade riding these lands, first as a cavalry scout during the war, then as a rancher carving out his own piece of the frontier. His weathered face, tanned by years under the merciless sun, remained impassive as he watched the scene unfold below. The man was dragging someone from the back of the wagon. A woman in a faded blue dress, her hands bound before her. Xavier's jaw tightened. The West had its share of unsavory business, but he'd never stood by while innocents suffered. Not since Antietam. He nudged his horse, Thunder, forward. The descent was steep, and rocks clattered beneath the stallion's hooves, announcing their approach. By the time he reached the bottom, the man had noticed him and stopped his shouting, though he kept a tight grip on the woman's arm. "Fine day," Xavier called out, his voice carrying the easy drawl of his Virginia upbringing despite the tension he felt. He kept his right hand resting casually near the Colt revolver on his hip. The man, hardly more than a boy, really, with a scraggly attempt at a beard and clothes too large for his frame, eyed him warily. "Ain't looking for company, mister." The woman's face was partially obscured by tangled strands of honey-brown hair, but Xavier could see the bruise darkening her cheek. Her eyes, when they met his, were the color of stormy skies and filled with a mixture of fear and something else. Pride, perhaps, or defiance. "Seems like your companion might disagree," Xavier replied, nodding toward the woman. "She ain't got no say in the matter," the young man spat. "She's my sister, and I'm taking her where she'll be of use instead of a burden." Xavier dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. Up close, he could see the family resemblance between them, though the woman's features were finer, more delicate. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23. "That's so?" Xavier asked. "Most brothers I know don't tie up their sisters." The young man's face reddened. "Look, this ain't your business. I got debts to settle, and Silas here's my way out. Already got payment arranged in Silver Creek." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Xavier had heard of such transactions, women sold to saloons or worse in frontier towns where females were scarce. Some called it marriage brokering. He called it what it was, slavery of another kind. "What's your name, miss?" Xavier asked, addressing the woman directly. Before she could answer, her brother yanked her arm. "She don't need to, Sophia," she cut in, her voice surprisingly steady despite her circumstances. "Sophia Mayfield." "Well, Miss Mayfield," Xavier said, "seems to me you're not traveling of your own accord." "She's my kin," the brother insisted. "Name's Josiah Mayfield, and I got every right. No man has the right to sell another human being," Xavier interrupted, his tone hardening. "Not since the war settled that matter." Josiah's hand moved toward the worn pistol at his waist. "You best ride on, stranger. This don't concern you." Xavier had faced down Confederate cavalry charges and Sioux war parties. A desperate boy with trembling hands didn't rattle him. "I'm making it my concern." What happened next unfolded in seconds. Josiah drew his pistol, but Xavier was years faster. His Colt cleared leather before Josiah's weapon was halfway up, and a single shot rang out. The bullet kicked up dirt at Josiah's feet, making him stumble backward and drop his gun. "Next one won't miss," Xavier warned. "Now untie your sister." Josiah's face contorted with rage and humiliation, but survival instinct prevailed. With shaking hands, he loosened the ropes around Sophia's wrists. "You're robbing me," he accused. "They paid $50 up front. I needed that money." "Then you should have found honest work," Xavier replied coldly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. "Here's $20. More than fair for the trouble of parting ways peacefully." Josiah snatched the money, his eyes darting between Xavier and his sister. "She's nothing but trouble anyway. Got a mouth on her that won't quit." He backed toward the wagon. "You'll see. You'll regret taking her off my hands." Xavier kept his gun trained on Josiah until the young man climbed onto the wagon seat. "I suggest you don't come looking for her." "She's dead to me," Josiah spat, then snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels grinding against the dirt road as it moved away. Only when the wagon had disappeared around a bend did Xavier holster his weapon and turn to Sophia. She stood perfectly still, rubbing her chafed wrists, her expression unreadable. "Are you hurt, Miss Mayfield?" She studied him, wariness evident in every line of her body. "Not beyond what you can see. Why did you intervene, Mr. Blackwood, Xavier Blackwood?" He removed his hat, a gesture of respect his mother had drilled into him long ago. "And I intervened because what he was doing wasn't right." Sophia's laugh was brittle. "There's plenty not right in this world, Mr. Blackwood. Most men ride on by." "I'm not most men." He replaced his hat. "My ranch is about 3 hours' ride from here. I can take you there until you decide what you want to do next, or I can escort you to the nearest town if you prefer." Her gaze sharpened. "And what payment would you expect for this kindness?" The question stung, but Xavier understood its source. A woman alone in the West learned quickly that few offers came without expectations. "None," he said firmly. "You'll have your own quarters and be left in peace. When you're ready to move on, I'll see you safely to wherever you choose to go." Sophia looked down the empty road, then back at him. The decision was clear in her eyes before she spoke. Whatever lay behind her, the future with her brother had been worse. "Your ranch, then," she agreed. "At least until I can make other arrangements." Xavier nodded and helped her onto Thunder, then mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance while still ensuring she wouldn't fall. As they rode away from the scene of her near sale, he couldn't help but notice how rigidly she held herself, as if bracing against the world. Little did he know that the woman sitting before him carried more than just her meager belongings. Sophia Mayfield harbored secrets that would shake the foundations of his carefully ordered existence and offer him redemption he never knew he needed. The sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains when Xavier's ranch came into view. Sophia had remained largely silent during their ride, answering his occasional questions with the briefest of responses. He didn't push. Whatever had brought her to such desperate circumstances with her brother, she didn't owe him her story. Blackwood Ranch was modest compared to some, but Xavier had built it with his own hands and took quiet pride in what he'd accomplished. A main house constructed of solid timber stood at the center, with a barn, corral, and bunkhouse arrayed nearby. Fields of grazing land stretched to the east, and a creek cut through the property, providing year-round water. 2 ranch hands emerged from the barn as they approached. Miguel, a Mexican vaquero who'd been with Xavier since the beginning, raised his hand in greeting before his expression shifted to curiosity at the sight of Sophia. "Boss," he called out, "wasn't expecting you back till tomorrow." "Change of plans," Xavier replied, dismounting before helping Sophia down. She wobbled slightly when her feet touched the ground, and he steadied her with a hand at her elbow, withdrawing the moment she was stable. "This is Miss Sophia Mayfield," he announced. "She'll be staying with us for a time." Miguel nodded respectfully, though questions lingered in his dark eyes. The other hand, a younger man named Tom, stared openly until Miguel elbowed him. "You hungry, Miss Mayfield?" Xavier asked. Sophia glanced around, taking in her surroundings with a caution that suggested she was accustomed to hostile environments. "Yes," she admitted, "but I'd appreciate a chance to wash up first if possible." Xavier nodded. "Of course. Mrs. Cooper manages the house. She'll see to your needs." As if summoned by her name, the front door opened, and a plump woman in her 50s emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. Edith Cooper had come west after losing her husband at Shiloh, and her steady presence had been a blessing since Xavier hired her 3 years prior. "I thought I heard voices," she said, her gaze falling on Sophia with immediate concern. "Oh, my dear, you look done in." Sophia straightened, and Xavier noted how she seemed to summon dignity from nowhere, despite her disheveled appearance. "I'm quite all right, thank you." Xavier briefly explained the situation, or as much as he knew of it, while Mrs. Cooper's expression shifted from concern to outrage to motherly determination. "That brother of yours sounds like he needs a good thrashing," she declared, taking Sophia's arm. "Come along now. We'll get you cleaned up and properly fed. I've got a stew that's been simmering all day." As Mrs. Cooper led Sophia toward the house, Xavier called after them, "The blue room should be prepared." The blue room was the nicest guest room in the house, with a view of the mountains and its own small sitting area. He wanted Sophia to understand she was a guest, not a charity case. While the women disappeared inside, Xavier tended to Thunder, removing the saddle and brushing him down. The rhythmic task gave him time to consider the implications of bringing a strange woman to his ranch. It wasn't the first time he'd offered shelter to someone in need, but something about Sophia Mayfield unsettled him. Perhaps it was the quiet strength in her eyes or the way she held herself like someone carrying an invisible burden. "Pretty thing," Miguel commented, leaning against the stable door. "Trouble?" Xavier shot him a look. "She needed help. Always the night, eh, Jeef?" Miguel smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Be careful. Woman running from something usually has something running after her. Her brother won't be a problem." "Brothers are not always the only problem," Miguel replied cryptically, then straightened. "Tom and I finished the north fence line. Should hold through winter now." They discussed ranch business for a while before Xavier headed to the house. When he entered, the aroma of beef stew and fresh bread greeted him. Mrs. Cooper was setting the dining table, and she gave him a pointed look. "That poor girl," she whispered. "Bruises on her arms, and not just from today. Someone's been rough with her for some time." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Her brother," she wouldn't say. Tight-lipped as a clam about her past, that one. But she's been properly raised, has good manners despite everything. A door opened upstairs, and they fell silent as footsteps approached the staircase. When Sophia appeared, Xavier found himself momentarily speechless. Mrs. Cooper had worked a small miracle. Gone was the dust-covered, disheveled woman from the trail. In her place stood a young lady in a simple green dress, likely one of Mrs. Cooper's, altered to fit her smaller frame, with her honey-brown hair washed and pinned back neatly. Without the grime of travel, her features were more pronounced. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and those stormy blue-gray eyes that seemed to evaluate everything with wary intelligence. The bruise on her cheek stood out more starkly against her clean skin, a reminder of what she'd endured. "Miss Mayfield," Xavier acknowledged with a nod. "I trust you found everything to your satisfaction. Mrs. Cooper has been extremely kind," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Blackwood. Dinner was a quiet affair at first." Sophia ate with the careful precision of someone who had known hunger but retained their manners. Mrs. Cooper, bless her, kept the conversation flowing, talking about the ranch, the weather, the latest news from town, everything but Sophia's circumstances. Gradually, the young woman relaxed enough to ask questions about the property and how long Xavier had lived there. Bought the land in '69, he answered. After spending a few years scouting for the army, started with just 50 acres and a tent. He allowed himself a small smile. It's grown since then. You built all this yourself. There was genuine curiosity in her voice. Had help, Xavier admitted. Miguel's been with me almost from the start. Good men are worth their weight in gold out here. And what about family? The question slipped out and Sophia immediately looked like she regretted it. I apologize. That's not my business. Xavier set down his fork. No need to apologize. I was married once briefly. Helen died of fever our first winter here. He stated the facts plainly, as he had learned to do over the years. No children. My parents are both gone, and my younger brother died at Chancellorsville. Sophia's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I'm sorry for your losses. Life in the West takes as much as it gives, he replied. What about you? Besides your brother, do you have family? She stiffened almost imperceptibly. No, my parents passed when I was 17. It's been just Josiah and me these past 5 years. The conversation lulled and Mrs. Cooper seized the opportunity to serve apple pie, chattering about how the last of last year's stored apples had held up remarkably well. After dinner, Sophia excused herself, fatigue evident in the droop of her shoulders despite her attempts to hide it. Mrs. Cooper showed her back to her room, returning moments later with a troubled expression. That girl's carrying more than just her brother's mistreatment, she declared once they were alone. Mark my words. Xavier sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Whatever it is, it's her business to share or keep. Always the gentleman, Mrs. Cooper sighed. Well, I've put her in the blue room as you asked. I'll leave out some of my late daughter's things for her tomorrow. They should fit well enough with some adjustments. When Xavier finally retired to his own room, he found himself standing at the window, gazing at the stars scattered across the Montana sky. Bringing Sophia Mayfield to his ranch had been an impulsive decision, but one he couldn't regret. Whatever troubles she brought with her, they couldn't be worse than the fate her brother had planned. Still, Miguel's warning echoed in his mind. Women running from something usually had something running after them. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the first hint of autumn touching the air. Xavier rose with the sun, as was his habit, and was surprised to find Sophia already in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Cooper prepare breakfast. Miss Mayfield, he greeted her, you needn't work while you're here. She turned from the stove, a determined set to her jaw. I won't be a burden, Mr. Blackwood. If I'm to stay, even temporarily, I'll earn my keep. There was such fierce pride in her statement that Xavier knew better than to argue. As you wish, but don't overtax yourself. Over breakfast, he outlined his plans for the day, checking on the herd, meeting with a cattle buyer from Helena, repairing fencing along the eastern boundary. Normal ranch business that suddenly seemed mundane when described to someone unfamiliar with his routine. I'd like to see more of the ranch, Sophia said after he finished, if that's permissible. Of course, though perhaps you should rest today. Your journey was difficult. A flash of something irritation perhaps crossed her face. I've endured worse than a hard ride, Mr. Blackwood. Fresh air would do me good, Mrs. Cooper intervened. I could use help with the vegetable garden this afternoon. The view from there takes in most of the property. Sophia nodded, accepting the compromise. As Xavier prepared to leave, she followed him to the door. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice lowered so Mrs. Cooper couldn't hear from the kitchen. I want you to know I don't intend to impose on your kindness for long. Once I've settled some matters, I'll move on. Xavier studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes despite her rest. "There's no rush, Miss Mayfield. Winter comes early to these mountains. It would be unwise to travel without proper preparation." She seemed about to say more, then pressed her lips together and nodded. "Thank you." The day passed quickly for Xavier, filled with the usual tasks and decisions that came with running a cattle ranch. The cattle buyer was impressed with his stock and agreed to a fair price for 20 head to be delivered the following month. It was good business, ensuring the ranch would weather the coming winter comfortably. When he returned in the late afternoon, he found Sophia in the garden as promised, kneeling between rows of carrots and turnips. She wore a faded work dress that must have belonged to Mrs. Cooper's daughter, with the sleeves rolled up and a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun. Even in such humble attire, there was something compelling about her, a quiet grace in the way she moved. She looked up as his shadow fell across the garden plot. "Your land is beautiful, Mr. Blackwood. Thank you." He crouched down beside her, noting the neat piles of weeds she'd extracted. "Mrs. Cooper's put you to work, I see." "I volunteered," Sophia corrected him. "It feels good to be useful." She hesitated, then added softly, "and to be outdoors without fear." The simple statement revealed more about her previous circumstances than perhaps she intended. Xavier felt a surge of anger toward her brother and whoever else had made her afraid of the open sky. "You're safe here," he said, the words a promise. She met his gaze directly for the first time since they'd met. "For now. But safety is rarely permanent, Mr. Blackwood." The resignation in her voice troubled him. Before he could respond, Mrs. Cooper called them for supper, and the moment passed. Days stretched into a week, and a routine emerged. Sophia helped Mrs. Cooper with household tasks in the mornings and explored the ranch in the afternoons. She was particularly drawn to the horses, and Xavier often found her by the corral, watching as Miguel worked with the animals. "She knows horses," Miguel told him one evening as they checked the tack in the barn. "Asked good questions. Not a city girl, that one." Xavier had noticed the same. Beneath Sophia's careful manners lay practical knowledge of ranch life. She never complained about the early mornings or the physical work, and more than once, he'd caught her gazing at the distant mountains with longing, as if they represented a freedom she craved. It was during the second week of her stay that Xavier discovered her reading in his study late one night. He'd come down for a glass of water and noticed the lamp still burning. Sophia sat in his leather chair, a book of poetry open on her lap, so absorbed that she didn't hear him approach. "Tennyson?" he asked, recognizing the volume. She startled, nearly dropping the book. "I'm sorry. I couldn't sleep, and Mrs. Cooper mentioned you wouldn't mind if I borrowed something to read." "She's right." Xavier leaned against the doorframe. "Do you have trouble sleeping often?" Sophia carefully marked her place and closed the book. "Since I was a child, my mind wanders to troubling places." She looked away. "Sometimes." Xavier moved to the small cabinet in the corner and poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass. He offered it to her, but she shook her head. "What brings you downstairs at this hour?" she asked. "Same as you, restless thoughts." He took a sip of the whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through his chest. "Though mine usually involve cattle prices and weather patterns rather than poetry." That earned him a small smile, transforming her serious face. A practical man, most of the time. He settled into the chair opposite her. "Though I've been known to appreciate Tennyson on occasion." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the lamp casting golden shadows across the room. Outside, an owl hooted softly. "May I ask you something, Mr. Blackwood?" "Xavier," he corrected her. "If we're going to have midnight conversations, I think we can dispense with formalities." She hesitated, then nodded. "Xavier, then, and you may call me Sophia." What did you want to ask, Sophia? Her fingers traced the embossed cover of the book. Why did you really help me that day? The truth, please. Xavier considered his answer carefully, because it was the right thing to do, but also. He paused, surprised by his own willingness to share. During the war, I saw too many people treated as property, fought against it. Seemed wrong to ride away when history was repeating itself right in front of me. You fought for the Union, Virginia Cavalry. My father owned slaves, but I couldn't abide it. Left home at 18 and never went back. He rarely spoke of this, but something about the quiet night and her attentive gaze loosened his tongue. When the war came, I knew which side I belonged on, even if it meant fighting against my own state. Sophia studied him with new understanding. That couldn't have been easy. Easiest decision I ever made, he countered. Right and wrong seemed clearer then. And now, Xavier smiled ruefully, the West has a way of blurring those lines, but some things remain clear. He finished his whiskey. No person should own another, not for any reason. Sophia's expression darkened. My brother didn't see it that way. To him, I was an asset to be traded when times got hard. What happened? Xavier asked gently. If you don't mind telling me. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as if she were viewing the events through a long telescope. After our parents died, Josiah tried to keep the farm going, but he wasn't cut out for it. Started gambling, drinking. The debts piled up. Her fingers twisted in her lap. He'd already traded most of our possessions when a man from Silver Creek offered him a deal. Xavier's jaw tightened. The man who paid him $50. Sophia nodded. Vernon Stillwater owns the largest saloon in Silver Creek. Said he needed entertainment for his establishment. Her voice turned bitter. Josiah convinced himself it was a legitimate job offer, or pretended to. The truth is, he didn't care what happened to me as long as his debts were paid, and you had no choice but to go along. I tried to run the night before, she admitted. That's how I got this. She touched the fading bruise on her cheek. Josiah caught me about a mile from the farm. Said if I tried again, he'd make sure Stillwater knew I needed extra breaking in. Xavier's hand tightened around his empty glass. I should have shot him when I had the chance. The vehemence in his voice seemed to surprise her. Violence only creates more problems. You did the right thing. She set the book aside and stood. I should try to sleep. Thank you for the company. As she moved toward the door, Xavier noticed for the first time a slight hesitation in her step, a protectiveness in the way she carried herself that had nothing to do with her brother's abuse. Sophia, he called softly. She paused but didn't turn. Whatever you're not telling me. It doesn't change anything. You're welcome here for as long as you need. Her shoulders tensed, then relaxed on an exhaled breath. Good night, Xavier. After she left, Xavier remained in the study, troubled by what she'd revealed and what she still kept hidden. The protective instinct she stirred in him went beyond simple compassion for someone in need. In just 2 weeks, Sophia Mayfield had become important to him in ways he wasn't prepared to examine too closely. The autumn days grew shorter, and the nights carried the bite of approaching winter. September gave way to October, bringing the first dusting of snow to the highest peaks. Sophia had been at Blackwood Ranch for nearly a month, and her presence had become a natural part of daily life. Mrs. Cooper clearly enjoyed having another woman in the house, and had taken to teaching Sophia her recipes and remedies. Even Miguel and the other hands had grown accustomed to her, tipping their hats respectfully when she passed, and sometimes lingering after dinner to hear her read aloud from Xavier's collection of books. Xavier himself found his days brightened by small moments: Sophia's laughter when one of the barn kittens pounced on her skirt, the way she hummed softly while hanging laundry, her thoughtful questions about ranch operations. He began inviting her to ride with him in the afternoons, showing her the furthest reaches of his property. During these rides, they talked. Xavier told her about his dreams for the ranch, the herd he was carefully breeding for strength and resilience, his plans to expand toward the western ridge once he saved enough to purchase the adjacent property. Sophia spoke of her childhood on a small farm in Missouri, her mother's garden that had bloomed with flowers as well as vegetables, the books her father had ordered specially from St. Louis because she'd read through everything in the small town library. She carefully avoided mention of recent years, and Xavier didn't press. It was during one such ride, as they paused atop a hill overlooking a meadow where part of the herd grazed, that Sophia finally broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I need to tell you something," she said, her hands tight on the reins of the gentle mare Xavier had assigned to her, "about why I can't stay much longer." Xavier felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He'd known this conversation was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. "You don't owe me explanations." "I do," she insisted. "You've been kinder than anyone had reason to be, and I've not been entirely honest." He waited, giving her the space to continue at her own pace. The October wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. Sophia took a deep breath. "I'm with child." The words hung in the crisp air between them. Xavier kept his expression carefully neutral, though his mind raced with implications. "I see." "No, you don't," she said quickly. "It's not what you're thinking. I wasn't." She swallowed hard. "There was someone. Before Josiah's gambling got out of hand, we were to be married." "What happened to him?" Xavier asked gently. Sophia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Robert was a surveyor for the railroad. There was an accident, a blasting charge that detonated too soon. He died 3 months ago." Her hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen, still flat beneath her riding skirt. "I didn't know I was carrying his child until after he was gone. And your brother didn't care except that it complicated his plans to sell me." Her laugh was hollow. "Stillwater wasn't interested in a pregnant woman, but Josiah convinced him I wouldn't start showing for a few more months. Said he could get plenty of use out of me before then." She shuddered. "When the baby came, they'd likely have given it away, or worse." Xavier's hand tightened on his saddle horn, rage building at the callousness of such men. "The baby is why you need to leave." Sophia finally looked at him directly. "A woman in my condition, unmarried and without family support, there are few options. I've been saving the money you've insisted on paying me for my work. Once I have enough, I plan to go to Denver. I've heard there are charitable homes there for women in my situation." The thought of Sophia alone in a strange city, at the mercy of strangers' charity, sent a chill through Xavier that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. And the child, pain flashed across her face. Most such homes require that the baby be given up for adoption to a proper family. It's the price of their assistance. Xavier watched a hawk circle lazily above the meadow, taking his time to formulate his response. When he finally spoke, he surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. "You don't have to go to Denver." Sophia frowned. "I can't impose on your kindness indefinitely. Once I begin to show, marry me." The words hung between them as unexpected as a summer snowfall. Sophia's eyes widened in shock. "What did you say?" Xavier turned in his saddle to face her fully. "Marry me. Stay here at the ranch. Your child would have a name, a home, security." "You can't possibly mean that," she whispered. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're strong, intelligent, kind. I know you work hard and care deeply. I know you deserve better than what life has handed you. But marriage, that's—" She shook her head in disbelief. Why would you offer such a thing? Xavier considered his motivations carefully. Because I respect you, Sophia. Because I believe every child deserves a chance at a good life. Because this ranch, for all its beauty, has been a lonely place since Helen died. He paused. I'm not proposing love, but partnership, friendship, a chance for both of us to build something meaningful. Sophia stared at him, clearly struggling to process his offer. You would raise another man's child as your own. I would raise a child who needs a father, Xavier corrected. The circumstances of their conception don't matter to me. She turned away, gazing out over the land that stretched before them. You're asking me to make a decision that will affect the rest of my life and yours based on a month's acquaintance. I'm offering you a choice, Xavier said quietly. Something it sounds like you've had precious little of lately. Take time to consider it. The offer stands regardless of your answer. Sophia nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. I will think on it. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the barn, Xavier noticed how naturally Sophia fit into the landscape of his life, the ease with which she dismounted and tended to her horse, the way she greeted Miguel with a warm smile, her gentle pat for the barn cat that twined around her ankles. He had spoken truthfully about his reasons for proposing, but he hadn't voiced the most compelling one. In the short time she'd been at Blackwood Ranch, Sophia Mayfield had awakened feelings he'd thought long buried with his wife. Not just attraction, though she was undeniably beautiful, but a deeper connection that had grown through their conversations and shared moments. Xavier was not a man given to impulsive decisions, but neither was he one to ignore the promptings of his conscience or his heart. Whatever Sophia decided, he knew he would not regret making the offer. That evening, Mrs. Cooper served a hearty stew with dumplings, chattering about the need to put up more preserves before the first heavy snow. Sophia was quieter than usual, responding to questions but offering little conversation of her own. Xavier didn't press her, understanding she needed space to consider his proposal. After dinner, he retreated to his study to review the ranch accounts while Sophia helped Mrs. Cooper with the dishes. Later, he heard the housekeeper bid Sophia good night and climb the stairs to her own room, but the expected sound of Sophia's lighter footsteps didn't follow. Just as he was considering whether to seek her out, a soft knock came at the study door. Sophia stood there, her face composed but her eyes reflecting inner turmoil. May I speak with you? She asked. Of course. Xavier set aside his ledger and gestured to the chair across from him. Would you like some tea or something stronger? She shook her head and perched on the edge of the chair. I've been thinking about your offer. And Sophia's hands twisted in her lap. It's generous beyond measure, but I have to ask, wouldn't you resent it eventually, taking on another man's child, a woman you didn't choose out of love? Xavier leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Sophia, I've spent 10 years building this ranch, creating something lasting. But what's the point of it all without someone to share it with, to pass it on to? He paused. As for love, I believe it can grow from respect and shared purpose. I'm not offering you a cold business arrangement. You hardly know me, she repeated her earlier objection. I could be difficult, disagreeable. A smile tugged at his lips. I've seen your temper when Miguel's dog stole your washing. I think I can handle difficult. That earned him a small laugh, but she quickly sobered. People would talk. They'd calculate the timing once the baby comes. Let them talk, Xavier said dismissively. This is my land. Anyone who works for me knows better than to spread gossip. Sophia stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the starlit ranch yard. When Robert died, I thought any chance at a normal life died with him. Then when Josiah... She swallowed hard. I've been so focused on survival that happiness seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford to consider. Xavier remained silent, giving her space to work through her thoughts. "If I accept," she said finally, turning to face him, "I want to be clear about something. I won't be a charity case or an obligation. I would expect to be a true partner in this ranch, to work alongside you, to have a voice in decisions." "I would expect nothing less," Xavier assured her, "and the child would be raised as yours in every way, no distinctions or reminders of their birth." "On my honor," he promised solemnly. Sophia took a deep breath. "Then yes, Xavier Blackwood, I will marry you." The simple acceptance sent a surge of unexpected joy through him. He stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. They were small but strong, marked by the work she'd willingly taken on since coming to the ranch. "Thank you for trusting me," he said quietly. "Thank you for offering hope," she replied, her voice steady despite the sheen of tears in her eyes. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, the first tentative foundation of their partnership laid between them. Xavier resisted the urge to pull her closer, knowing she needed time to adjust to this new future they were building. "We should tell Mrs. Cooper in the morning," he said finally. "She'll be thrilled. She's been not so subtly suggesting I find a wife for years." Sophia's smile was genuine, if a bit tremulous. "She's a good woman. I hope I can live up to her expectations." "You already have," Xavier assured her. "Now you should rest. Tomorrow we can discuss arrangements." After Sophia retired to her room, Xavier poured himself a small measure of whiskey and returned to the window. The ranch lay peaceful under the October moon, the buildings he'd constructed with such care casting long shadows across the yard. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the next season, children running across the fields, laughter filling the house, growing old with someone by his side. It wasn't the future he'd once envisioned, but perhaps it would be better than anything he could have planned for himself. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small ranch community. Mrs. Cooper, as Xavier had predicted, was ecstatic, immediately launching into plans for the ceremony and preparations for making the house more suitable for a proper family, as she put it. Miguel offered quiet congratulations, though Xavier caught his form in watching Sophia with thoughtful eyes when she wasn't looking. The other hands were more overtly curious, but a stern word from Xavier ensured their questions remained unasked. Xavier rode into the nearest town, Silver Falls, the following day to speak with the circuit preacher about performing the ceremony. Reverend Parker, a graying man with kind eyes who visited the outlying ranches every 6 weeks, agreed to marry them during his next circuit in mid-November. "Rather sudden, isn't it?" the Reverend commented mildly. "Don't believe I've heard mention of Miss Mayfield before." "Life in the West moves at its own pace, Reverend," Xavier replied evenly. "When you know something's right, there's little sense in delay." The older man studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I'll be at Blackwood Ranch on the 15th. Will you be wanting a large celebration?" "Simple is best," Xavier said. "Just the ranch hands and perhaps a few neighbors." As he prepared to leave town, a familiar voice called out to him from the doorway of the general store. "Blackwood, heard you're finally getting hitched." Daniel Foster, owner of the neighboring Twin Pines Ranch, strode toward him with an outstretched hand. They'd been friendly competitors and occasional drinking companions since Xavier had established his ranch. "News travels fast," Xavier observed, shaking Foster's hand. "Small town," Foster grinned. "Mrs. Winslow at the Mercantile said you ordered extra supplies and mentioned a wedding." "Who's the lucky lady?" "Someone from Helena." Xavier hesitated, but knew concealment would only feed gossip. "Her name is Sophia Mayfield. She's been staying at the ranch for about a month now. Foster's eyebrows rose. Quick work even for frontier standards. When it's right, Xavier echoed his words to the Reverend. Well, congratulations. Foster clapped him on the shoulder. Emily will be delighted to hear it. You must bring your bride to dinner once you're settled. God knows there are few enough ladies out here for proper society. Xavier nodded, though the thought of subjecting Sophia to the curiosity of neighbors made him uneasy. We'll see. It may be a while before we're making social calls. Of course, Foster winked knowingly. Newlyweds need their privacy. After collecting the supplies he'd ordered, and a few special items for Sophia, Xavier headed back to the ranch, his thoughts turning to the woman who would soon be his wife. They had agreed to a practical partnership, but he couldn't deny the growing warmth he felt in her presence. Whether she felt the same was harder to determine. Sophia kept her emotions carefully guarded, revealing little beyond polite gratitude and the occasional flash of dry humor. When he returned, he found her in the garden with Mrs. Cooper, harvesting the last of the fall vegetables before the frost could claim them. The sight of her kneeling among the plants, her hair escaping its pins in honey-colored tendrils around her face, made something twist pleasantly in his chest. "Successful trip?" she asked, standing to greet him. "Very," he confirmed. "Reverend Parker will be here on the 15th. Mrs. Cooper beamed. "Just enough time to prepare properly. I was just telling Sophia we should ride to town tomorrow to look at fabrics. Every bride needs a special dress, even if the ceremony is small." Sophia looked uncomfortable. "That's not necessary, it is," Xavier interrupted gently. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I took the liberty of getting you this. Consider it an engagement present." Sophia accepted the package with surprise. "You didn't need to open it," he encouraged. She carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a length of deep blue silk ribbon and a small silver hair comb inlaid with tiny pearl flowers. "Oh," she breathed, running her fingers over the delicate comb. "It's beautiful." "The blue reminded me of your eyes," Xavier said, then felt foolish for the sentiment. "I thought perhaps you could use them for the wedding if you wished." A blush colored Sophia's cheeks. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful." Mrs. Cooper looked between them with satisfied approval. "Well now, I'll just take these vegetables inside and leave you two to talk." She gathered her basket and bustled toward the house, subtlety clearly not her strong suit. When they were alone, Sophia carefully rewrapped the gifts. "You're being very kind." "It's not kindness," Xavier said honestly. "I want you to feel valued, not just useful." Sophia's expression softened. "I do, more than you know." She hesitated, then added, "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." "Anything?" "After we're married." She looked away, suddenly seeming younger and more vulnerable. "What will be expected of me?" "As your wife." The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Xavier chose his words carefully. "Nothing you're not comfortable with, Sophia. I meant what I said about this being a partnership. That extends to all aspects of marriage." She nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "And if I'm not ready for certain aspects?" "Then we wait until you are," he said simply. "If that time never comes, then so be it. I won't deny I find you attractive, but I would never press for more than you freely offer." Sophia finally looked at him, relief evident in her expression. "Thank you for understanding." "We have time," Xavier assured her. "There's no need to rush anything beyond the ceremony itself." As they walked back to the house together, Xavier was struck by the realization that he would wait as long as necessary for Sophia to come to him, willingly, not out of obligation or gratitude, but desire. The thought should have troubled him, this willingness to enter a marriage that might remain unconsummated, but instead he felt only certainty that he was making the right choice. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. Mrs. Cooper insisted on a thorough cleaning of the entire house, recruited the hands to build a proper archway for the ceremony, and spent hours in the kitchen testing recipes for the wedding feast. Sophia seemed both bemused and touched by the older woman's enthusiasm. "She's doing more for this wedding than my own mother would have," she confided to Xavier one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Mrs. Cooper has a daughter in St. Louis who eloped," Xavier explained. "I think she's making up for the wedding she never got to plan." "Well, she's been wonderful," Sophia said. "She's even altering one of her daughter's dresses for me. It's lovely cream-colored with lace at the collar and cuffs." Xavier smiled at her obvious pleasure. "I look forward to seeing you in it." As the wedding approached, Sophia grew quieter, often lost in thought. Xavier found her one afternoon in the small ranch cemetery where Helen was buried, standing before the simple wooden cross that marked his first wife's grave. He approached slowly, not wanting to intrude on a private moment, but Sophia heard his footsteps and turned. "I hope you don't mind," she said softly. "I wanted to pay my respects." Xavier moved to stand beside her, gazing down at the grave he visited less frequently now than in the early years after Helen's death. "I don't mind." "What was she like?" Sophia asked. "Helen," Xavier considered the question. "Brave, determined. She was a Boston doctor's daughter who decided the West needed educated women more than the East. We met when I was still scouting for the Army, and she was traveling west with a group of missionary teachers." He smiled at the memory. "She had very firm ideas about everything." "You loved her very much," Sophia observed. "I did," Xavier acknowledged, "but our time together was brief. Sometimes I think I was in love with the idea of her as much as the reality." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that. Robert and I grew up together. Loving him seemed as natural as breathing. But we were young. Sometimes I wonder if what we had would have been enough for a lifetime." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, each honoring their past while standing on the threshold of their shared future. "You think she would mind?" Sophia finally asked. "My taking her place," Xavier touched her arm gently. "Helen wanted this land to become a home to nurture life. I think she would approve of what we're doing." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I want to be worthy of this second chance, of your kindness." "You are," Xavier assured her. "More than worthy." As they walked back to the house together, Xavier felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The past had its place in shaping them, but their future held more promise than he dared to hope for in years. The morning of November 15th dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline autumn day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Xavier rose early, spending extra time shaving and donning the dark suit he rarely wore. From his window, he could see the ranch hands putting final touches on the arch they'd constructed in the yard, Mrs. Cooper directing their efforts with authoritative gestures. Tradition dictated he shouldn't see Sophia before the ceremony, so he took his breakfast in the study, reviewing cattle contracts to calm his unexpected nerves. It was nearly noon when a knock at the door announced Miguel's arrival. "Everything is ready, Chief," his foreman reported. "Reverend Parker arrived a half-hour ago. The neighbors are starting to come," Xavier nodded, adjusting his tie one final time. "And Sophia," Miguel's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "Mrs. Cooper says the señorita is beautiful, like an angel." They walked together to the yard, where about 20 people had gathered the ranch hands in their Sunday best. Several neighboring families and Reverend Parker standing beneath the arch, decorated with late blooming wildflowers and ribbons. Xavier took his place beside the Reverend, clasping his hands behind his back as he waited. Mrs. Cooper had arranged for one of the hands who played fiddle to provide music, and the sweet strains of a folk melody filled the clear autumn air. When the music changed to a wedding march, Xavier looked up to see Sophia emerging from the house on Miguel's arm. She had asked the foreman to give her away, a request that had visibly moved the usually stoic Mexican. Xavier's breath caught at the sight of her. The cream-colored dress fit her perfectly, highlighting the graceful curve of her neck and the slender shape of her waist. Her honey-brown hair was swept up, held in place by the silver comb he'd given her, with a few soft curls framing her face. The blue ribbon was woven through her upswept hair, its color indeed a perfect match for her eyes. But it was her expression that affected him most deeply, a mixture of hope, determination, and something softer that made his heart race as she approached. When Miguel placed Sophia's hand in his, Xavier felt the slight tremor in her fingers. He squeezed gently, offering reassurance, and was rewarded with a small, grateful smile. Reverend Parker's words washed over them the familiar promises of love, honor, and faithfulness as Xavier gazed into Sophia's upturned face. When the time came to speak their vows, his voice was steady and sure. Sophia's was quieter but equally certain, her eyes never leaving his as she promised to be his wife. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend concluded. "You may kiss your bride." Xavier hesitated, mindful of their agreement not to rush intimacy. But Sophia rose slightly on her toes, offering her lips with shy willingness. He bent to meet her, the kiss gentle and brief but filled with promise. Applause broke out around them, and Mrs. Cooper dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief as they turned to face their small gathering as husband and wife. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with Mrs. Cooper's finest cooking roast beef, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and an elaborate wedding cake that must have taken her days to prepare. Xavier kept Sophia close as they accepted congratulations from their guests. She handled the attention with graceful poise, though he could sense her tension when particularly probing questions arose about her background or how they had met. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured when they had a moment alone. "Everyone has been kind," she acknowledged. Though Mrs. Foster asked quite pointedly how long we'd known each other. Xavier chuckled. "Emily Foster considers herself the social authority for 3 counties. Don't worry about her." As the afternoon waned, the celebration continued with music and dancing. Xavier led Sophia in a waltz, surprised by how naturally she followed his lead. "Where did you learn to dance?" he asked as they moved across the yard. "My mother insisted on proper accomplishments," Sophia replied. "Dancing, piano, embroidery, all the skills a lady might need to make a good match." "She would be proud to see you today." A shadow passed over Sophia's face. "I hope so, though I doubt this is the marriage she envisioned for me." "Perhaps better," Xavier suggested. "A home of your own, land security." "Yes," she agreed, her expression softening. "Better in many ways." As the sun began to set, the guests gradually departed with final well wishes and knowing smiles. Mrs. Cooper had prepared the master bedroom for them both, moving Sophia's belongings from the blue room and adding fresh linens and flowers. When the last neighbor had gone and the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Xavier found Sophia standing on the porch, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. "Shall we go in?" he asked quietly. "It's getting cold." She nodded, though he noted the nervous twist of her wedding ring, his mother's simple gold band that he'd kept all these years. Inside, Mrs. Cooper had left a lamp burning low in the parlor and another in the upstairs hallway, but had tactfully retired to her own room. The house was silent as they climbed the stairs together. At the door to the master bedroom, Xavier paused. "Sophia, I meant what I said. Nothing happens tonight that you don't want." She met his gaze steadily. "I know, and I appreciate that more than I can say." She took a deep breath. "But I am your wife now in name and in law. I would like to try to be your wife in truth as well." Xavier's heart hammered against his ribs at her words. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely," she admitted with disarming honesty. "But I trust you, Xavier. That's a start, isn't it?" He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "More than a start." The bedroom was warm, the fireplace lit and casting golden light across the large four-poster bed that dominated the room. Sophia stood in the center, suddenly looking very young and uncertain. "Would you help me with the buttons?" she asked, turning her back to him. "They're rather difficult to reach." Xavier stepped closer, his fingers surprisingly steady as he worked the small pearl buttons that ran down her spine. The nape of her neck was exposed above the dress, a delicate curve that he resisted the urge to kiss. When the last button was undone, he stepped back, giving her space. "I'll turn around while you change." Sophia glanced over her shoulder, a hint of humor in her eyes despite her nervousness. "That seems rather formal for a husband, doesn't it?" "Perhaps," he conceded, "but I want you comfortable above all else." She considered this, then nodded. "Thank you." Xavier turned to face the window while he heard the rustle of fabric behind him. He removed his suit jacket and vest, loosened his tie, but went no further in his own disrobing until she spoke. "You can turn around now." Sophia stood by the bed in a white cotton nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. The lamplight caught the golden highlights in the honey-brown waves, and Xavier was struck again by how beautiful she was. "Your turn," she said softly. He nodded and began to undress, keeping his movements unhurried. When he was down to his underclothes, he extinguished all but one lamp, leaving the room in soft, forgiving shadows. They met at the edge of the bed, the distance between them charged with uncertainty and possibility. "May I?" Xavier asked, reaching toward her. Sophia nodded, and he gently drew her into his arms. She was warm and solid against him, her head fitting perfectly beneath his chin. They stood that way for a long moment, simply holding each other until he felt some of the tension leave her body. "We can just sleep," he offered again. "There's no rush." Sophia tilted her face up to his. "Kiss me," she whispered, "like you mean it this time." Xavier needed no further invitation. He lowered his mouth to hers, the kiss deeper and more thorough than their chaste exchange during the ceremony. Sophia's lips were soft, hesitant at first, then increasingly responsive as she relaxed into his embrace. What followed was a gentle exploration, each touch seeking permission, each response granting it. Xavier discovered the sensitive spot behind Sophia's ear that made her sigh, the curve of her waist that fit perfectly in his hands. She grew bolder too, her fingers tracing the contours of his shoulders, the line of his jaw. When they finally lay together in the wide bed, their nightclothes discarded, Xavier moved with exquisite care, mindful of both her inexperience and her condition. Sophia's trust humbled him, her willingness to share this intimacy despite their unusual circumstances a gift he hadn't expected. Afterward, she lay curled against his side, her breathing soft and regular. Xavier thought she had fallen asleep until she spoke. "I didn't expect it to be like that," she murmured. "Like what?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Tender," she finally said. "I thought it would be an obligation, not something I could find pleasure in." Xavier brushed a kiss against her temple. "That's how it should always be between us, mutual pleasure freely given." Sophia's hand came to rest over his heart. "Thank you for today, for everything." As she drifted to sleep in his arms, Xavier felt a contentment he had almost forgotten was possible. Their marriage had begun as an arrangement of convenience, but something deeper was taking root between them, something that felt remarkably like the beginnings of love. Winter descended on Blackwood Ranch with icy determination. The first major snowfall came just a week after the wedding, blanketing the property in 3 feet of pristine white. Xavier and the hands worked tirelessly to ensure the cattle had access to feed and shelter, while inside the house, Sophia and Mrs. Cooper created a warm haven against the biting cold. As November gave way to December, Sophia's pregnancy became more evident, her slender frame changing subtly to accommodate the growing life within. Xavier found himself fascinated by these changes: the gentle swell of her abdomen, the new fullness in her face, the way she unconsciously rested her hand over the baby when she was lost in thought. Their nights together continued to deepen their bond. What had begun as tentative exploration evolved into a comfortable intimacy, each learning the other's body and desires. Xavier was careful never to treat her as fragile, understanding that her strength was part of what drew him to her. But he remained attentive to her changing needs as the pregnancy progressed. During the day, Sophia insisted on maintaining her role in ranch operations, despite his concerns. She kept the accounts with a sharp eye for detail, helped Mrs. Cooper with the endless winter tasks of mending and preserving, and even ventured out to the barn on milder days to check on the pregnant mare Miguel was particularly concerned about. "You're doing too much," Xavier commented one evening as he watched her mend one of his shirts by the fire, her fingers deftly working the needle despite her obvious fatigue. Sophia looked up with a wry smile. "Says the man who spent 14 hours today clearing snow from the north pasture." "That's different, is it?" she set aside her sewing. "Xavier, I've never been idle. Work keeps me from dwelling on things I can't change." He recognized the shadow that sometimes crossed her face when she thought of her brother, her lost fiancé, the circumstances that had brought her to him. Moving to sit beside her on the sofa, he took her hand in his. "You're allowed to rest," he said gently. "No one here will think less of you for it." Sophia leaned against him, her head finding its natural place on his shoulder. "I know, but I want to contribute. This is my home now, too." The simple declaration warmed him more than the blazing fire. "Yes, it is." As Christmas approached, the atmosphere at the ranch grew festive despite the isolation imposed by the heavy snows. Mrs. Cooper, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, filled the house with the scents of gingerbread and cinnamon, and enlisted Sophia's help in knitting gifts for the hands. Xavier found himself watching his wife with increasing wonder as she embraced these preparations, her natural grace and warmth drawing everyone into the spirit of the season. Even Miguel, not normally given to sentimentality, was caught humming carols as he worked in the barn. On Christmas Eve, after a simple but hearty dinner, they gathered in the parlor where Xavier had set up a small pine tree decorated with paper stars. Sophia had crafted and candles in special holders ordered from the catalog. "It's beautiful," Sophia breathed, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes. "We never had such a tree when I was a child." "It's a German tradition," Mrs. Cooper explained, settling into her armchair with a cup of mulled cider. "My husband's family brought it with them when they immigrated." Xavier sat beside Sophia on the sofa, his arm naturally finding its way around her shoulders. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait until morning, but now seems right." He placed a small package wrapped in tissue paper in her hands. Sophia unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "Oh, Xavier," she whispered, opening the locket to find it empty. "It's lovely. I thought," he said, suddenly feeling uncertain, "that perhaps when the baby comes we could put a small portrait inside. And maybe someday another on the other side, if we're blessed with more children." Tears filled Sophia's eyes. "You truly mean to treat this child as your own, don't you?" "Our child," Xavier corrected gently. "From the moment you agreed to be my wife, your baby became ours." Sophia closed the locket and pressed it to her heart. "I have something for you too, though it can't compare to this." She retrieved a package from beneath the tree and handed it to him. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool, the stitches perfect and even. "I know it's simple," she began, but Xavier stopped her with a kiss. "It's exactly what I needed," he assured her, wrapping the scarf around his neck despite the warmth of the room. "And knowing you made it with your own hands makes it precious, Mrs." Cooper beamed at them both, her expression that of a woman seeing her fondest wishes fulfilled. "Well, I believe this calls for more cider and perhaps some of that fruitcake I've been saving." Later, as they prepared for bed, Sophia stood by the window watching the snow fall in the moonlight. Xavier moved behind her, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked softly. She turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. "Yes," she said simply. "I never expected to be again, but yes." Xavier drew her closer, his hand coming to rest on the curve of her belly. "I've been thinking about names," he admitted. "For the baby," surprise flickered across Sophia's face. "Have you, if it's a boy, perhaps Robert," he suggested, "to honor his father." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "You would do that?" "The child should know where they came from," Xavier said. "When they're old enough to understand." Sophia's arms tightened around him. "And if it's a girl," Xavier smiled. "I thought perhaps Elizabeth after my mother, but I'm open to suggestions." "Elizabeth is beautiful," she murmured. "Elizabeth Grace, perhaps." "Perfect," he agreed, then felt a flutter against his palm where it rested on her abdomen. "Was that?" Sophia laughed, the sound bright with joy. "Yes, the baby's been quite active today. I think they approve of their potential names." Xavier knelt before her, pressing his ear to her belly with a sense of wonder. The movement came again, stronger this time, and he looked up at Sophia with amazement. "Hello there, little one," he said softly. "Your mama and I are waiting for you." The tenderness of the moment overwhelmed Sophia. She ran her fingers through Xavier's dark hair, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "We're going to be a family," she whispered, the realization striking her anew. "We already are," Xavier replied, rising to draw her into his embrace. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Sophia found herself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. The grief of losing Robert, the betrayal by her brother, the fear and uncertainty of being sold like property, all of it had somehow delivered her to this man, this home, this unexpected happiness. "Xavier," she whispered, uncertain if he was still awake. "MMM." His voice was drowsy but attentive. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The admission hung in the quiet room, more significant than any vow they had exchanged. Xavier's arms tightened around her. "I know I've already fallen in love with you, Sophia Blackwood." The words, spoken with such simple certainty, filled the last empty spaces in her heart. She had come to him carrying one life, only to find that she carried something else as well, the salvation of a good man who had been alone too long. And in return, he had given her back a future she thought lost forever. Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping Blackwood Ranch in a pristine blanket of white. But inside the master bedroom, warmth and hope flourished, a spring beginning in the depths of winter. The remainder of winter passed in a peaceful rhythm of work and domestic contentment. January brought the coldest temperatures in recent memory, forcing everyone to stay close to home and hearth. February arrived with brilliant sunshine that belied the continued frigid air, the snow-covered landscape sparkling like diamond dust under the clear sky. Through it all, Sophia's pregnancy progressed steadily. By late February, she was undeniably showing, her once slender figure now prominently rounded. Mrs. Cooper fussed over her constantly, insisting on extra rest and special meals to build up her strength for the birthing. Xavier found himself increasingly protective, though he tried not to hover. He'd seen the flash of irritation in Sophia's eyes when her independence was questioned, but he couldn't help the surge of concern whenever she attempted tasks he deemed too strenuous. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she reminded him one afternoon when he objected to her carrying a basket of laundry. "I know," he conceded, taking the basket anyway, "but humor me." Sophia's expression softened. "You're going to be an impossibly attentive father, aren't you?" "Probably," he admitted with a smile. As March brought the first signs of thaw, Sophia began preparing in earnest for the baby's arrival, expected in early May. Mrs. Cooper helped her sew tiny garments and blankets, while Xavier converted a corner of their bedroom into a nursery space, building a cradle with his own hands from pine harvested on their land. The approaching birth made Xavier reflect on practical matters as well. One evening, after consulting with the lawyer in Silver Falls, he presented Sophia with documents to sign. "What are these?" she asked, scanning the legal language with a frown. "Property papers," Xavier explained. "I've put the ranch in both our names. If anything should happen to me, you and the child will be secure." Sophia looked up sharply. "Nothing is going to happen to you." "Probably not," he agreed. "But a man in my position needs to think ahead. Ranching can be dangerous work." She signed the papers with a steady hand, though her expression remained troubled. "I don't like thinking about a future without you in it." Xavier pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Then don't. This is just practical planning, nothing more." But that night, Sophia held him more tightly than usual, as if reassuring herself of his solid presence beside her. As April unfurled across the land in a riot of new green and wildflowers, the ranch came fully back to life after the winter dormancy. Calving season brought round the clockwork for Xavier and his men, while the garden demanded attention from Sophia and Mrs. Cooper. Despite her advancing pregnancy, Sophia insisted on spending time outdoors each day, supervising the planting of vegetables and herbs. Xavier often found her sitting on the bench he'd placed near the garden, her face turned up to the spring sunshine, one hand resting protectively over the swell of their child. "You look peaceful," he commented one such afternoon, pausing in his work to join her for a moment. "I am," she replied, making room for him on the bench. "For the first time in a very long time I feel settled." Xavier covered her hand with his own. "I'm glad. I've been thinking," Sophia said after a comfortable silence, "about Josiah." Xavier stiffened slightly at the mention of her brother. "What about him? I wonder where he is, if he's all right." She met Xavier's surprised gaze steadily. "I know that must seem strange after what he did." "He's your brother," Xavier said simply. "Blood ties are complicated." Sophia nodded. "I was so angry for so long. Hurt, betrayed. But lately I've been thinking about how he was after our parents died, the pressure he was under, the debts our father left." She sighed. "It doesn't excuse what he did, but I understand a little better now. Would you want to find him, make peace?" She considered the question seriously. "Not yet, but someday perhaps, for the baby's sake if nothing else. They should know their uncle, flawed as he is." Xavier admired her capacity for forgiveness, even as part of him recoiled at the thought of Josiah Mayfield ever coming near his wife or child. "If that's what you want, when the time comes, I'll help you find him." Sophia squeezed his hand gratefully. Thank you. But that's a concern for another day. Right now, we have more pressing matters. As if in agreement, the baby delivered a particularly vigorous kick that was visible even through Sophia's dress. They both laughed, the moment of tension dissolving. Active today, Xavier observed. Always, Sophia groaned. Especially at night. I think this one might be a rancher like their papa, up with the dawn and busy until sunset. The casual reference to him as the baby's father warmed Xavier deeply. In the months since their wedding, the distinction between biological and chosen parenthood had faded in his mind. This was his child in every way that mattered. The peaceful spring days continued, but as April waned and Sophia's due date approached, a new tension entered their household. Dr. Harris from Silver Falls had agreed to attend the birth, but the unpredictable Montana weather and the remote location of the ranch meant there was always a chance he might not arrive in time. Mrs. Cooper, who had assisted at many births in her younger years, reassured them both that she was perfectly capable of delivering the baby if necessary. Still, Xavier found himself checking the weather obsessively and keeping the best horses ready in case a rider needed to be sent for the doctor. "You're wearing a path in the floorboards," Sophia observed one evening as Xavier paced the bedroom. "I'm not due for another week at least." "Babies don't always follow schedules," he replied, finally sitting on the edge of the bed beside her. "I just want everything to be perfect." Sophia took his hand, guiding it to where the baby was moving. "Feel that, strong and healthy. We're going to be fine." Xavier nodded, though the worry didn't leave his eyes entirely. He had lost one wife to the harsh realities of frontier life. The thought of losing Sophia to the dangers of childbirth haunted him more than he cared to admit. 2 days later, his fears nearly materialized. He had been working with Miguel in the north pasture when Tom came galloping across the field, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss!" the young hand shouted before he'd even fully reined in. "Mrs. Cooper says to come quick. It's the missus, the baby's coming early." Xavier's heart lurched painfully. "Has someone gone for the doctor? Johnson rode out an hour ago, but there's a storm coming in from the west. Mrs. Cooper says. She says there might not be time." Xavier was on his horse before Tom finished speaking, racing back to the ranch house with fear clawing at his throat. The sky to the west was indeed darkening ominously, heavy clouds gathering over the mountains. When he burst into the house, Mrs. Cooper met him at the foot of the stairs, her normally composed face tight with concern. "How is she?" Xavier demanded, already moving toward the stairs. "The labor came on suddenly and strong," Mrs. Cooper reported, following him. "Her water broke while she was helping me with the bread. The pains are coming fast, too fast for a first baby." A cry from upstairs accelerated Xavier's pace. He found Sophia in their bed, her face flushed and damp with sweat, her knuckles white as she gripped the sheets through a contraction. "Xavier," she gasped when she saw him, reaching out a trembling hand. He took it immediately, sitting beside her on the bed. "I'm here. I won't leave you." Mrs. Cooper bustled around the room, gathering clean linens and the supplies she'd prepared weeks earlier. "The baby's in a hurry," she told Xavier grimly, "and I'm worried about the bleeding. It's heavier than it should be." Fear clenched his heart, but Xavier kept his expression calm for Sophia's sake. "What can I do? Keep her comfortable, talk to her. I need to check how far along she is." As Mrs. Cooper examined Sophia, another contraction seized her stronger than the last. She cried out, crushing Xavier's hand in hers. "That's it, dear," Mrs. Cooper encouraged. "You're doing wonderfully. The baby's head is already engaged. We won't have long to wait now." Outside, thunder rumbled as the storm approached. Xavier silently cursed the timing the doctor would never make it through in these conditions. The next hour passed in a blur of pain and fear. Sophia's labor intensified rapidly, each contraction building on the last with barely a moment's respite between them. Mrs. Cooper moved with efficient calm, but Xavier caught the worried glances she exchanged with Miguel, who had come to the door with hot water and extra lanterns in case the storm knocked out the power. "Something's wrong," Sophia gasped during a brief lull. Her face was alarmingly pale, her nightgown soaked with sweat and blood. "It shouldn't hurt this much." Xavier stroked her forehead, pushing back damp strands of hair. "You're the strongest woman I know, Sophia Blackwood. You can do this." She managed a weak smile before another contraction took her, this one tearing a scream from her throat. "It's time," Mrs. Cooper announced. "On the next pain, Sophia, you need to push with all your might." What followed tested every ounce of Xavier's resolve. Sophia fought bravely, pushing when instructed, resting when allowed, but with each effort she seemed to grow weaker. The bleeding Mrs. Cooper had mentioned earlier continued, soaking through the linens faster than they could be changed. "I can see the head," Mrs. Cooper finally announced. "One more big push, dear." Gathering her remaining strength, Sophia bore down, her cry of pain giving way to a gasp of relief as the baby slipped into Mrs. Cooper's waiting hands. A moment of silence, then a thin wail filled the room. "A girl, Mrs. Cooper announced, quickly wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. "A beautiful little girl." Xavier felt a surge of joy so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. "Sophia, you did it. We have a daughter." But Sophia's eyes were closed, her face ashen. When he touched her cheek, her skin was cool and clammy. "Sophia," alarm sharpened his voice. "Sophia, open your eyes." Mrs. Cooper handed the swaddled infant to Miguel, who had remained to assist. "Take the baby," she ordered, then turned her attention to Sophia. "She's losing too much blood. We need to stop it now." The next hours were the longest of Xavier's life. Mrs. Cooper worked tirelessly to stem the hemorrhage, applying every remedy she knew while Xavier held Sophia's limp hand, whispering desperate prayers and promises. Outside, the storm raged, lightning splitting the sky and rain lashing against the windows. Inside, another kind of storm threatened to tear away everything Xavier had come to hold dear. "Don't leave me," he pleaded, pressing Sophia's fingers to his lips. "Please don't leave me." "Not when we've only just begun." Whether it was Mrs. Cooper's skills, Xavier's prayers, or Sophia's own stubborn will to live, the bleeding finally slowed, then stopped. Her pulse remained weak but steady, her breathing shallow but regular. "She'll need time to recover, Mrs. Cooper said, her own exhaustion evident in the droop of her shoulders. "But I believe the worst has passed." Only then did Xavier allow himself to look at his daughter, who had been placed in the cradle he'd built, patiently waiting to be properly welcomed into the world. Miguel had swaddled her expertly, a skill Xavier hadn't known his foreman possessed, and she was sleeping peacefully despite the drama of her arrival. He lifted her carefully, marveling at how light she was, how perfectly formed. Her tiny face was scrunched in sleep, a wisp of dark hair visible beneath the edge of her blanket. "Hello, Elizabeth Grace," he whispered, carrying her to Sophia's bedside. "Your mama's resting now, but she fought so hard to bring you here safely." As if sensing she was being discussed, Sophia's eyelids fluttered. She opened her eyes with visible effort, her gaze unfocused at first, then sharpening as she saw Xavier holding their daughter. "Is she?" Her voice was barely audible. "Perfect," Xavier assured her, carefully placing the baby in the crook of Sophia's arm. "Absolutely perfect." A weak smile touched Sophia's pale lips as she gazed down at their child. "She has Robert's hair," she murmured, but I think she has your chin." Xavier swallowed the lump in his throat. "She's beautiful like her mother." "I was so afraid," Sophia whispered. "I thought I might leave you both." "Never," Xavier said fiercely. "I wouldn't have let you go." Mrs. Cooper cleared her throat from the doorway. "The storm's passing. I've sent Miguel to see if he can find the doctor and Johnson on the road. The new mother needs rest now." Xavier nodded, carefully taking Elizabeth from Sophia's weakening grasp. "Sleep," he told his wife. "We'll be right here when you wake." As Sophia drifted into exhausted slumber, Xavier sat in the rocking chair by the window, his daughter cradled against his chest. The storm had indeed passed, the first stars appearing between breaks in the clouds. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional drip of water from the eaves. "Your arrival was quite dramatic, little one," he murmured to the sleeping infant. "But then, the most precious things often come to us through trials." Elizabeth sighed in her sleep, her tiny fingers curling around one of his. The simple gesture cemented what Xavier already knew in his heart: this child was his, not by blood but by choice, by love, by the sacred trust Sophia had placed in him. Dr. Harris arrived shortly before dawn, weary from fighting his way through the storm-damaged roads. He examined both Sophia and Elizabeth thoroughly, confirming Mrs. Cooper's assessment that while Sophia had lost a dangerous amount of blood, she would recover with proper rest and care. "She's a fighter," the doctor told Xavier, "and the baby is remarkably healthy for being a bit early." "You're a fortunate man, Blackwood." "I know," Xavier replied, his gaze moving between his sleeping wife and daughter. "Believe me, I know." The days that followed were both exhausting and exhilarating. Sophia regained her strength gradually, while Elizabeth proved to have healthy lungs and a determined personality from the start. She nursed vigorously once Sophia's milk came in, and seemed to regard the world with a serious contemplation that reminded Xavier of himself. Word of Elizabeth's dramatic arrival spread quickly through the scattered ranching community. Neighbors rode in with gifts and offers of help, many expressing relief that mother and child had survived such a dangerous birth. By the time Elizabeth was a month old, life at Blackwood Ranch had established a new normal. Sophia had resumed many of her regular duties, though Xavier insisted she rest whenever possible. The baby accompanied them everywhere, either carried in Sophia's arms or in a sling Miguel's wife had sent when she heard the news. One perfect June evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Elizabeth sleeping contentedly in her cradle beside them, Sophia turned to Xavier with an expression of quiet wonder. "You remember what you said when you proposed to me? That you weren't offering love but partnership and friendship." Xavier nodded, taking her hand in his. "I remember." "You were wrong," she said simply. "What you offered was something far greater than you knew. You gave me a future when I had none. You gave Elizabeth a father who loves her unconditionally, and you gave yourself a family to heal the loneliness you pretended didn't exist." Xavier brought her hand to his lips. "Are you saying I got more than I bargained for, Mrs. Blackwood?" "We both did," Sophia replied, her eyes shining with emotion. "When Josiah dragged me toward that wagon, I was certain my life was over, or at least any chance of happiness was. I never imagined that his cruelty would lead me to the greatest blessing I could receive, which is you," she said simply. "You and the life we're building together." Xavier drew her into his arms, mindful of her still healing body. "I love you, Sophia, not because you gave me Elizabeth, though I'll be eternally grateful for her. I love you for your strength, your kindness, your courage." "And I love you," she whispered against his chest. "Not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you're the best man I've ever known." As twilight deepened around them, Xavier reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them together. A chance encounter on a dusty road, a desperate brother, a woman sold like property, all leading to this moment of perfect contentment. Elizabeth stirred in her cradle, making the small sounds that preceded waking. Sophia moved to attend to her, lifting the baby with practiced ease and bringing her back to the porch swing. "Look at that sky, Elizabeth," she murmured to their daughter. "This is your home. These mountains, these fields, all of it will be part of you, just as you're part of us." Xavier watched them, his heart full to bursting. Whatever challenges lay ahead in life in the Montana Territory, ensured there would be many, they would face them together, as a family. In rescuing Sophia that day, he had never expected to find his own salvation. Yet here it was, embodied in the woman who had become his wife, and the child they now called their own. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Xavier Blackwood counted himself the richest man in the territory. Not for his land or his cattle, but for the love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances, a love that promised to grow stronger with each passing season.